Peter, he must have felt pretty self-satisfied when he asked Jesus how many times you must forgive your offending brother or sister. And Peter suggests 7 times. His willingness to forgive 7 times well exceeded what the law and religious teachers of that day required. But poor Peter yet again. How surprised he must have been to hear Jesus' answer, not 7 times, but 77 times. Peter's willingness to forgive 7 times indicates that he was beginning to learn what Jesus required of his disciples, forgiveness. But Jesus does not put a limit on forgiveness, as Peter learns today. 77 times. That means unlimited. So startling is Jesus' statement that he follows it immediately with a parable meant to clarify and to support this very demanding teaching. It is clear from what Jesus has instructed about love of neighbor and even enemies that forgiveness must be the hallmark of his disciples. But as important as this teaching is, it doesn't make it easy to put it into practice. Is there anybody in this building who doesn't know about the necessity of we Christians to forgive? But it's one thing to know this and quite another to be able to do it. That's why we have today's striking parable. The sequence of this story is very important. It begins with a servant owing his master an amount so huge that he could not possibly repay it. Still, he begs for forgiveness. And he gets it. Not by any reason of personal merit or the promise to repay because he won't be able to, but it is solely because of the king's extraordinary generosity. The servant who owed the debt to the king didn't earn forgiveness by anything that he did. That's the heart of today's gospel message. The parable makes it quite clear that once forgiveness was given, something was expected of that released servant. If we haven't been changed by forgiveness and then forgive others in turn, we haven't fully accepted and acted upon the gift that we have received. Like the unforgiving servant, in the end, we are not released from our debt. It's as if the king said, "Don't you realize the treasure I gave you by forgiving you? How come you weren't changed by that?" In Jesus' teaching, it is quite clear that we as Christians must be known by our forgiveness, based on how much and how often we have been forgiven. God has forgiven us without any reservation or limits. And if we hold back forgiveness from others, then that's a sign that we have not accepted it ourselves from God, nor allowed God to enter into our hearts and change us. And this matter of forgiveness isn't only about what happens to 2 individuals. Today's gospel message in Matthew is addressed to the entire community of Christians, the entire community of Jesus' disciples. Mutual forgiveness is the very core of our Christian community. It was then, and it is now. The inability to forgive and the holding of grudges are destructive forces in our family, our social organizations, and especially in our church. It not only divides us into feuding camps, but prevents the Christian community from being a sign of God's forgiving light in a world that is darkened by conflicts and vendettas, which come, as Sirach tells us today, from hugging tightly to wrath and anger. And this theme is most appropriate for me when I look upon the 16th anniversary, just last Monday, of the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Have we forgiven that brutality? Not forgotten, but forgiven. Run a fast glance over the map of the world today. Can you find any place where forgiveness shines? How many places are still in conflict because of religious, ethnic, tribal, racial, economic, or environmental differences? What change would a good dose of forgiveness play in those situations? That is something for us to pray for at today's Eucharist, isn't it? And after that prayer, keep your eyes and ears open for signs of reconciliation that pops up in most surprising ways. After all, the parable's key element is at the beginning of this tale, the king's surprising gift of forgiveness. And when such surprises happen in our lives and the world, then we know their source. And we have a reason then to say thank you at this Eucharist, which is our greatest prayer of thanksgiving. Forgiveness begins with God, but it doesn't stop there. We are expected to reflect that divine gift in our own lives. Today, we look over our past and present lives. Against whom do I hold on tightly to resentment and hatred? Whom have I not forgiven? Who is waiting for me to say, I forgive you? Whom have I offended and need to ask forgiveness? The world 16 years ago and right up to today certainly is not a model of forgiveness for us. So where do we turn for help? We are reminded today at this Eucharist that on our own we cannot become forgiving people, not in the way that Jesus expects of us. But we are not on our own. Because as we heard last week, Jesus is in our midst. His words of forgiveness can transform us and empower us to forgive. He is the one who does first what he asks us to do. Forgive from your heart.